It's great to have you all here. Please have a seat. I'm going to be very brief here at the front end of this. I know you know, and I'm going to introduce the folks you're going to meet more intimately as you watch this documentary. But the events of 9/11 obviously mean different things to different people. In the case of our guest, they had a profound impact on them personally. And folks like you, most of you here are college or graduate students. It literally, you grew up in the aftermath of 9/11. And you have a totally different perspective than I do or than the survivors you're about to meet, survivors of the losses they've undertaken. Many of you have lived their lives almost perfectly divided between how long you're alive before 9/11 and how long you've been alive since 9/11. When you're 9 or 10 years old, as many of you were, 10 years is like an eternity, an absolute eternity. But some of you have, in fact, I suspect all of you, that future that you wondered about when you were 10 years old, it's here. You now are in a position that yours is a generation that lived through these horrors. There are all kinds of studies that were done on the impact of children between the ages of 3 and 12 years old and seeing what happened that day and hearing and adjusting to all the changes your parents were adjusting, you were just moving into. And so it's presumptuous of me or anyone to suggest how any individual American digested all that's happened then in these last 10 years. I'll be speaking at Shanksville with President Clinton and President Bush, dedicated a memorial on the 10th. Different perspective than having spoke last year at the trade towers. Different perspective than my speaking of the 10th anniversary on the 11th at the Pentagon. And so, but one of the things is clear, that yours is a generation that lived through these horrors and remember, most of you probably remember how you felt as young as you were the day you watched and tried to figure out what in God's name is going on. And now, in many ways, your generation has changed more than any other generation that witnessed what happened on the 11th. As a matter of fact, your generation, I really am offended by folks, and you've probably observed this with me, offended by folks who talk about your generation as not being as strong or as noble as other generations. Your generation, since 9/11, just since 9/11, have produced 2,800,000 people who joined the United States Armed Services, knowing with almost certitude that they would be deployed to a war zone. Your generation has more grit and determination. Your generation has contributed already as much as most generations have who are twice your age, when they were twice your age. And so that day when you were children, your world began to be shaped by all the events that followed after 9/11. And I suspect the one thing everyone had in common, whether you were 10 or 100 years old on that day, thinking back now as adults, it was a dose of fear, confusion, incredible difficulty understanding why anyone would ever do what was done on that day. I lived through, when I was your age, I lived through the second half of the Cold War, the Vietnam War. Before that, the assassination of a beloved president. I was your age, remember hearing the news exactly where I was at the University of Delaware, standing on the steps of Hullion Hall when I heard that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. Like the 9/11 generation, those events fundamentally changed America. They shaped our history, and now they're part of our permanent national identity. They're different events, seeking and sparking different emotions, but all of them prove one thing, that the resolve of this country in the face of crisis is what makes us special. The absolute resolve that this country has shown in the face of crisis. Time and again, we could have been torn apart, but we came together. Shaky periods, but we came together. Time and again, we could have been brought to our knees, but we stood tall and we fought back. And time and again in tragedy, we found renewal, literally found renewal. And that's what this country is all about. And that's what Jim's movie is about. Jim made a truly remarkable film, as you're about to see. It takes the whole sweep of the last 10 years and filters it through 5 incredibly compelling stories you're going to learn more about. Stories about the resilience of the American spirit, about the courage of people who have been through hell and the death of their loved ones and who have made a new life from it. I must tell you, we were talking inside, I admire them for being here. Having lost a wife and daughter shortly after I was elected as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate when they were broadsided by a tractor trailer and my 2 sons left in very bad shape, I didn't have the courage they had. I didn't have the courage to relive those experiences by talking about highway safety and all the things that could have been discussed. And it was not the truck driver's fault that this happened. But the point of it was, I didn't have the courage to handle it. Because the truth is, this is a bittersweet day for all of them. Because no matter how long, and some of you who've lost a mother, a father, a brother, or a sister, you know no matter what, when there's a memorialization of their loss, you relive it immediately. It's not like it's a distant memory. You relive it. And so I just want to thank you. I want to thank you all for having the courage to go through this process over the last 10 years and be here, because I know from personal experience in different circumstances, there's nothing easy about it. But you give hope to millions of people who are suffering through tragedies of their own and loss of loved ones right this very moment. And so it's a transformation that goes on all the time in small ways with millions of people all across the country. But I've never seen such a moving and powerful way of telling the story of rebirth as Jim's film does. It was such grand scope, and I think you'll share my view when you've seen the film. Jim collapsed 10 years of history into the lives of 5 incredible people through this movie. He tells their stories, but really, in a way, he tells us all America's story. It sounds like hyperbole, but he really does tell us America's story. The story that's been told before, but one that never grows old. It's our story. It's your story. It's a story of a nation of people who will continue for generations because we are a nation about possibilities. I would argue it's the single most defining feature of America. It's always about possibilities. It ultimately always is about tomorrow. It's always about hope. And each generation gets to tell that story in their own way. And now it's your turn to begin to tell the story. So I met, as I said, Ling and Tanya and Tim and Brian just moments before I came in there. But I felt I knew them after having watched the documentary. They're going to be around afterwards, and Jim is as well. I'm going to turn the mic over to Jim in a moment, but he's going to be around afterwards to take your questions after the film is over. I apologize, but I'm using that old excuse. I got to meet with the President, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense. And I can blow off the Secretary of State and Defense, but not the President. But all kidding aside, I'm not going to be able to stay. But I would not add anything to what these 5 people are going to be able to respond to. And so with that, it's my honor. It's my honor to introduce the man who's thought of this, developed it, put it on film. And again, if there's any message that is completely a recurring story in America, is rebirth. Rebirth, and things get better. So ladies and gentlemen, Jim, it's your podium. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And thank you for your candor and warmth in speaking with us, and the way you spoke to us. I know I speak for them. It felt so much connection and intimacy and feeling, and it's greatly appreciated, so thank you. I want to thank also Matthew Blank from Showtime, and you know, it's really nice when I get such a warm welcome about a film that I was involved in, but there were so many folks that were involved, and I want to recognize David Solomon, the co-producer of the film, who is here, Brian
All right,
Rafferty.
David, stand up.
Oh, great. David Solomon, thank you.
Man.
Thank you. I like Brian Rafferty, who's the chairman of the Project Rebirth and the leader of our educational initiative, and Caitlin Olson, who also works very closely. She's the executive director. So thank you all so much. Thank you guys for everything. The film wouldn't exist without everything you've done. And Tom Lappin, my best friend, but he's not here. He's the DP. And of course, you know, Brian, Tanya, Ling, Tim, thank you for your courage. That's really what it's about. You were very courageous through the whole process, so thank you. To speak just briefly personally, a month after September 11th, I visited New York City. It was a close friend of mine, a guy named Nick Wood. He was actually a Georgetown graduate. And Nick was getting married. And it was a joyful occasion. Obviously, it was a wedding, but at the same time, there was a bittersweetness. And I had one distinct memory in my mind. It was in the corner of a room about, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through. There were a bunch of guys who were just crying. And I realized that the events of September 11th were weighing so heavily in this room and so heavily on the people that I felt this odd sense of a mixture of joy and sadness. And I went to sleep that night. I woke up the next morning, and I said to my wife, Chris, I said, I want to go to Ground Zero. And I said specifically, I want to go to Ground Zero because if we, or when we, have children one day, I want to be able to tell them what our experience of the day was. And when I say tell them, I mean from a mom and dad's perspective of saying, this is what the day was to us. So I went down there with Chris, and that image that you're familiar with of the debris and the wreckage, the smell, was so vivid. It's palpable even to me now. And I felt this sense of dread and this sense of anxiety. And what happened was I saw a woman in particular who was walking around the site, and she had a mask on, and she had that resolve in her eyes. And I thought for a second, wow, maybe one day we'll be okay. And I turned back to the site, and I thought, well, you know what? This debris, one day it'll be gone, and something else will be here. I don't know what it'll be. And I had this feeling, just a small feeling of an upswell of hope. It was a very strange feeling to have. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to be able to show and give an audience this experience of going from dread and anxiety to a place of hope in a fairly short time? And it led to the idea of just simply showing it, putting up cameras around Ground Zero that began to take a frame of film every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day, and have continued to do so. The human toll after spending time there was so great, and the weight of the grief was so heavy, that I realized that we needed to actually capture the human aspect of this. So I invited, at the time, 10 participants to become involved in what I call a human time lapse, interviewing them once a year, every year, to really explore what they were going through, the kinds of thoughts they had in the shower when they were waking up in the morning. And that became, as it grew together and integrated, that became Project Rebirth, and ultimately Rebirth, the film you're going to see today, a blending of the physical and emotional healing of the site. I have 2 children now. Rebecca's 8. Emmett will tell you, he's 5 3/4. And my hope is that one day, when they're your age or old enough, that they'll be able to sit in a theater like this and watch the film and be able to find some answers to the day and to the aftermath. So, thank you.